What's up guys, this is Kelvin and today I'm going to show you how to change the transmission fluid on your 2006 Honda Civic. This is my 2006 Honda Civic LX. Bought it in 2005 new and it has over 200,000 miles on it. Let's see how much it has to be exact. Alright, let's check it out. Out of the way. Okay, it has officially 206,077 miles on it. Now this 2006 Honda Civic has been running pretty good. It had some issues a couple years ago with the engine regarding a cracked block Honda recall, but other than that it's been pretty problem free, and after getting that repaired pretty much I've had no issues at all. But like with all vehicles, you have to do preventative maintenance. So today what we're going to do is we're going to change the transmission fluid on this Honda Civic. Now, I've done it a couple times in the past, and 206,000 miles, that's about a good time to do it again, because I can actually feel the transmission not shifting as smoothly as it once did. So what does that mean? Well, when you put it in the drive and you put some gas on the pedal, and it starts to accelerate, you can feel a little bit of a transition in between the gears where it's not super smooth. And typically what happens is that you can feel it having some roughness in between. And the reason for that is, well, the fluid is starting to get worn out. Now, I live in San Francisco, so I used to do a lot of driving in the city. And when you go up some of these really extremely inclined hills, you can actually wear the transmission out much faster than normal. And there was a time when going up these hills on a regular basis, I would actually feel the car struggling uphill, especially when it switches gears from a lower to a higher gear as I accelerated up the hill. Another thing that I noticed is that sometimes it would have a very slightly burning smell. When that happens, you know that probably you need to do something with the transmission fluid, because at that time, something has worn out much more quickly than it was intended to. First things first, we gotta apply the proper protection to our hands so we don't get all this stuff all over the place. I use these nitrile gloves, but you can use any kind of glove basically, as long as it has the right protection. Don't use like fabric gloves or anything that's too thin, because what I found is sometimes fluid actually can seep through. Now, changing the transmission fluid is actually relatively easy. So the first thing we're going to do is jack up the car. Okay, we're going to jack up the car right here on the reinforced points right here. So one of the things I do is I use a jack. Actually, I use multiple jacks, but for the first jack I usually jack it up at this point right here. And so you can see that this is one of those jacks that you can buy basically at any auto parts store. You can get it at Walmart probably. You can buy it at O'Reilly's or Harbor Freight, something like that. And so it's a 2-ton jack, and it's relatively easy to use. You just make sure this is secure, the release. Okay, and then you just basically use this stick to just jack up this part here. Okay, now that the car is jacked up, I had to adjust this a little bit. We see that there's some gap here, and then you should be good to go. Don't stick your fingers under there for prolonged periods of time. Okay, now what I like to do is I like to use a second level of reinforcement. So what I'm going to do is I have another jack, and because they're pretty cheap, you can get more than one. I like to support it up on this point right here, and this is the tow hook on the front. Okay, so what I'll be doing, I'll be putting the second jack right here, popping it up for extra support. Okay, when I jack up this side, I don't use any kind of cloth or anything like that. Just go in there with the jack, kind of do it by hand at first. Make sure the grooves are in the right place and they really get around this hook right here, because you definitely don't want it slipping or anything like that. Okay, and then now when I support this side, I don't actually jack it up all the way. I just use it as a support. So even just slightly supporting it like so, is enough, okay? This is just a secondary jack for safety. The first one is really the primary one that holds the car up. Okay, next thing you do is you open up the hood. Okay. Like so. And then you find the transmission fill hole, and that's right here. You can see that there's this little dipstick here, the yellow one. I'm just going to pull it out slightly so that air can flow into the transmission. And what that'll allow it to do is when you drain the fluid from the bottom, it'll just come right out. Okay, then I'm going to put my drain pan in the right spot. Okay, and that's around here. You're gonna look for the drain plug. Okay, for the transmission, it's right here. Okay, it's right here. It's not too far away. Okay, so there it is. And what it needs is one of those square extension rods, or those extensions, to just be put right in there. So let's see if we can see that here. So you see it's a square. Okay, so we're just gonna place the drain pan under here, and then we're gonna undo this bolt and just let all the fluid flow out. Okay, here is our drain pan. Okay, we're gonna place it right somewhat aligned with this bolt here, and then we're gonna use our extension and pop that open, and the fluid should just come right out. Okay, so we've got our socket wrench and we've got our extension, and we're just going to pop it right in there right now. Okay, just like that. Okay, it's in, and then we're gonna make sure the socket is in the right orientation. Okay, and there we go. And I'm just gonna pull it, and that should loosen the bolt. Okay, and that was it. Okay, it loosens the bolt. Okay, move the pan under the drain bolt and start unscrewing the drain bolt. Now, it'll be handy to keep some paper towels or rags around you while you do this, but there it goes. Comes right out. Ooh, okay, here we go. Okay, maybe that's not the best spot because it's getting everywhere, but okay, there we go. It really squirted all over the place there. Okay, which is why you should have your paper towels handy. But we'll just let it drain out and clean up a little bit, and then put the drain bolt back on and fill it up with new fluid. Okay, so one of the things I want you guys to look at is the drain bolt. Okay, so one thing I mentioned is that the fluid may be brownish in color. We're going to take a closer look in a second at the fluid. Sorry, it's a little windy today, but if you take a look here, this is the drain bolt. It's got like this magnetic tip on it. What that does is it helps to capture, you know, any metal particulates that are floating around the transmission. Okay, so if we take a look here, if we try to wipe it, I haven't wiped it yet, but let's wipe it and see what happens. Okay, you see how black it is? Oh my gosh, look at that. Look at all that black stuff. Okay, and that's really all the dirt and wear, particles, whatnot, that your transmission produced since the last time you changed your transmission fluid, which is why it's always important to do that and to clean the tip of this so that it can start accumulating the wear and tear particles after you change your fluid for the next round of driving. Okay, another thing to keep in mind is if you look at the drain bolt, it's also got this washer here, and that's really important for keeping the seal between the bolt and the transmission housing. Now, one of the things you don't want to do when you screw it back in is you don't want to over tighten this. Okay, it's very important that you don't over tighten this because the threads on this bolt here, I think this bolt is made out of steel, and the housing on your transmission is made out of aluminum. So steel is harder than aluminum. When you put this in the transmission housing, if you torque it down too much, you could actually strip the threads on the inside of your transmission, not on the bolt. So it's really important that you do not over torque this. Okay, this washer is good enough to keep the seal between your bolt and your transmission housing. Okay, it's a piece of aluminum, I think, which compresses just slightly. You don't need to tighten it down too much. So I would say hand tighten it first, and once it's hand tightened, then you just put a very small amount of torque, and that should be enough. Okay, so after about 5 minutes or so of letting this thing drain out, we can see that it's dripping out at a pretty steady pace. Not too much fluid is flowing out anymore. It's just dropleting out little by little. So I think at this time it's good to put the drain bolt back on. Actually, what you should do is you should wipe this off a little bit. So wipe this area. Okay. Wipe this area here. Let's see here. Okay, there we go. Still dripping, okay, but you're never gonna get 100% out because, well, you know, there is fluid inside the transmission still. Okay, but you do your best. Okay, so we're going to now screw in by hand the drain bolt. Okay, and like I said, once it's in there, maybe we'll do another quick wipe. Okay, but once it's in there, you just torque it down ever so slightly. Okay. All right. So we're gonna change the setting on our ratchet. Okay, and then we're going to make sure it gets in there. Okay, on the square hole, and then just tighten it slightly. Okay, just slightly. So it's snug, and then a little bit more. And that's it. Stop. Okay, at this time we're also going to pull out the drip pan, and let's take a look at what we've got there. Okay, so we're gonna very slowly take out the drip pan because the weight of this fluid is actually, I think, thinner than the oil, in general. So if we take it out, we take a look. Okay, there it is, right? It's pretty fluid. It'll slosh around a lot. And let's get a relatively clean paper towel and let's take a look. Okay, I'm just gonna dip it in there and take a look. Okay, it's still pretty red in color, but not bright red. Okay, so the factory brand new fluid is bright red. This has some darkness to it, but overall not too bad. Now, one time I changed it, it was actually kind of brown. Okay, and when it's really like a brown or dark brown, then you know that, you know, you've gotten some wear and tear in the transmission and it needs to be changed. But this is okay. Okay, so what we'll do is we're going to take this fluid, we're going to pour it into a container so that we can have it properly disposed. One of the things I like to do is have a cardboard under here, and that helps in several different ways. We can just slide this thing right out. Okay, that way you're not messing with the pan sliding across the ground and vibrating, causing it to spill out any excess. Okay, so the next part, I'm going to pour this into a container. Okay, so for extra protection, you know, I like to use like a big oil container like this, and actually another drip pan under it, because for those of you who have ever done this, there's a very nerve-wracking moment when you pour the fluid from there into a container. What can happen is it could basically just spill all over the place. Okay, so the best way to do this is to have some backup plan, and that's this extra drip pan that we can wipe with a paper towel afterwards if we get any fluid in there. Another thing I do is use a funnel. Okay, so we've got a funnel here. It'll make things even easier. Now, some of these drip pans are not really great. Okay, so if you look at the spout here, these are actually not too good. So when you start pouring it out of here, it could get all over the place. Okay, so we will have a mess one way or another. Now, there are types that are sealed. They have like a top on this, and they have like a nozzle that comes out of the pan. Those are usually better because you know you're aiming exactly where that nozzle is. But for now, we're just gonna bear with what we've got here. Okay, so we just transferred all the fluid from the pan into here. Okay, we have a little bit of mess, but it's not too bad. Everything worked out pretty good. At this point, I like to just, you know, wipe up the excess on the pan here. What you can do is you can take the old rags that you had earlier that you used to just kind of clean up a little bit. And since this is all going to be wiped up anyway, just absorb as much as you can and then throw away these paper towels into a plastic bag. Okay, so that way we have a very clean and professional looking environment, right? Now, some of you might be wondering, why is he cleaning up now? He hasn't even refilled the transmission fluid. Well, there's a good reason for this. Okay, and the reason is, for those of you who've ever worked with oil or any kind of transmission fluid, it's a very dirty substance. Okay, and to be honest, I hate working with oil and fluid. Now, what I hate more is making a big mess. if I left this transmission fluid in the pan and started working under the car, continuing some other business, I could have easily kicked this pan, or it could have been jostled in some way or another. And that's a huge problem, right? Because if you kick the pan, then you can end up with a big mess. So I like to clean up ahead of time. And then that way I can move all the stuff out of the way and then continue working on the car. Okay, the next thing you're gonna need is one of these really long funnels. And that's so that we can take the funnel and then we can actually access the fill plug, which is usually way down there in the engine bay. So what we're gonna do is we're going to just put this aside for now. And then we're going to take the dipstick out, okay? We're gonna set that aside as well. Just leave it right here. Okay, and then we're going to take the funnel and stick it in the fill hole. Okay, there we go. Okay. I have something in my funnel right here. It's a good idea to check your funnel beforehand. I actually had some paper towels in there while I had this stored away, and that's so that any residual transmission fluid wouldn't get all over the place. But make sure that the funnel is fairly clean on the inside. Okay, we're just about to put fluid in it, so we don't want to get any unknown substances or particles, tissue paper, etc. into our transmission. Okay, so now that it's clean, okay, we're gonna put it in the fill hole. Okay, so let's zoom in on that, okay. And there we go. Okay, it's on the fill hole, just like this. Okay, now we're ready to fill this up. Okay, so Honda is very particular about the fluid that you use in the Honda transmission. So normally you have to use the genuine Honda certified fluid. Okay, we have some of that right here. Okay, it's a little bit expensive, but for my Honda, the Civic 2006, it uses this Honda Genuine Automatic Transmission Fluid ATF DW1. Okay, the code is DW1. And I bought this on either Amazon or eBay. I think it's like $10 a quart, something like that, but I could be wrong. Bought it a while ago, but for the Honda Civic, it uses exactly 3 quarts of this. Okay, what we're gonna do is we're going to slowly and steadily fill up the transmission, and then we're gonna test the fluid level using the dipstick. Okay, I said earlier that we're going to check the fluid level with the dipstick. So before we do that, let's take a look at the dipstick. Okay, so here's a dipstick. You know, it's like a plug on one end, and then there's a dipstick that runs through the middle of it. It's just a metal pole, and basically you just insert this into the fill hole. Okay, and then you just pop it out. Okay, now if you take a look at the end here, there's several markings that one should pay attention to. If we look here, that we've got this flat area of the dipstick, okay, and on the end of this flat area we have these 2 lines, and then we have like this checkered X pattern in the middle between these 2 vertical lines. And what that means is that the fluid should land somewhere in between that checkered region when it is adequately filled up. So we're going to check this later to make sure that it is properly filled up and not overfilled. Okay, so don't overdo it. Okay, now because this is an older vehicle, I don't just use straight up ATF DW1 in the transmission. What I like to do is I use 2 quarts of this. Okay, I use 2 quarts of this, and then on the 3rd quart I use Lucas. Okay, so this Lucas transmission fix, in my experience, it actually works to fix any slippage, any wear. It can be used in conjunction with your Honda transmission fluid. Now, don't use just Lucas transmission fix because, well, the manufacturer Honda, they need the original fluid in there. It probably has a different consistency, different viscosity, different properties. The transmission will need some of its original Honda genuine fluid based on the way it's designed so that the fluid can flow to the appropriate areas of the transmission. So use a combination of the genuine fluid and the Lucas. What I do is I use 2 quarts of this and then 1 quart of this. Okay, and this is usually some pretty thick stuff. Now, when I first tried using Lucas, I didn't feel any difference, and this was probably about 50,000 miles ago. But what I found out is that you have to let it work, okay? Once you've put this in, it will not work immediately, okay? You actually have to drive it around a bit, and maybe about 10,000 or even more miles, you will start feeling a difference. What we're going to do is we're going to put the Lucas in first. Okay, it says here compatible with all transmissions and transmission fluids with the exception of CVT transmission and transmission fluids. Okay, it also says you just add 1 bottle of the Lucas transmission fix with each fluid change, approximately 30,000 miles. Please refer to the owner's manual. Okay, now there are some other bits of information here that might come in handy. Now it says certain things here, okay? Add to existing transmission fluid with engine warm and idling or with fluid change. Okay, what we're doing is a fluid change. A second bottle may be necessary in larger or badly worn transmissions. Smaller transmissions use 12 ounces. It's really thick stuff. Okay, and we'll kind of let the genuine fluid wash it down. It's kind of hard to see in this lighting, but here, if I put it at this angle, you can see it flowing out. It's also red in color, so it shouldn't be mistaken with engine oil or anything like that. But we're just going to let this flow through the funnel and use the entire bottle. That's what I would recommend. I don't think it hurts. You can see that we've now emptied the entire bottle into the funnel, and it's so thick that it won't even go down. We can see that this long funnel is nearly completely filled. It's filled, you know, near to the top, and it just goes down really slowly. The fluid is still coming out of the bottle, but we'll just let it sit. Now, one thing I can do is I can pull on the funnel just a little bit. What that'll do is let a little bit of air come out of the transmission as the fluid is entering the transmission. So we'll just pull it out just slightly so that it can flow a little bit better. Okay, so just something like this. Just a slight pull, but not too much. Okay, it's just like this. Okay, and we'll be right back once this is down. Okay, and you can see that helped a lot here, right? So if you take a look at the fluid, it's really flowed to a lower spot on the funnel, and it will continue to go down. Okay, next we're going to add our Honda transmission fluid. Okay, just pour that in there. Another bottle of the Honda transmission fluid. Listen to that stuff. If you take a look at it now, if you look at the color of the Honda transmission fluid, the new stuff, it's very bright red, bright pink. So you can see that the older fluid is definitely contaminated with wear and tear. And the original fluid should be a very bright red, even a bright pink color. So we're going to do that. If you take a look at this, see? Very bright. And I'd say that right now is about a good time to check the fluid level. Okay, so we're going to stick the dipstick in there. Okay, kind of let it sit inside. And then we're going to pull the dipstick right out and then check in between the markings. Okay, now if you take a look here, we are not even in the marking yet. And we'll add a little bit more as needed. Okay, it was a little bit low. And we're going to check again. Okay, let's take a look here. Okay, we're somewhere in the middle now. Okay, somewhere in between. So some of you guys who have done this before will know that when I let the car down, it will actually be different from what I have here. So what I'll do in a little bit is I'll let the car down, check this again a couple times, and make sure it is right in between the two markings. Okay, now we're going to let the car down in the reverse order that we jacked it up. So first we're going to do this jack. Okay, just release. Okay, there we go, it's coming down. And secondly, this jack. Be really careful with that one. Check the fluid one more time. I think it's good. Okay. All right, and that's it. And finally, the test drive. Nice and smooth, not hearing any weird noises, no slippage at all. I'm gonna take a look at these RPMs as I shift. Ooh, so smooth. Didn't feel or hear that at all. Now my road is kind of bumpy, but you get the idea. We'll take it on the freeway a little bit later. And that's how you change the transmission fluid on your 8th gen 2006 Honda Civic. See you next time.